Hi booktube, Aaron here, hope you're doing very well. Today I'm just going to be wrapping up the things that I read in the month of July, and then we'll be going through some of my plans for August. Partway through the month of July I made a random reading update to go through some of the books that I read towards the beginning of the month, and I'll just very quickly run through them just for the sake of completion. First, we had two books of quite slim books of poetry. One was Wings of Hope and Daring by Eira Stenberg, her selected poems, translated by Herbert Lomas, and The Fight Journal by John W. Evans. I wasn't planning it, but they were both books talking about divorce and breakups and things, something I don't really gravitate towards in my reading, particularly when it comes to poetry, and I felt that Stenberg did a better job of it. I found her approach to be more artful and just more interesting, and just a more pleasurable reading experience on the whole. This was just a little bit more plain and more direct really, but quite diaristic, I suppose. It was just telling you what happened rather than this was turning it into something quite artful and examining it through all kinds of images and metaphors, whereas this was literally just this happened, then this happened, and then this happened. So two contrasting approaches to a subject that I don't tend to read a lot about. And then another one that was a bit different, just a nice whimsical little book to read between other books, was Red Sky at Night, the Book of Lost Countryside Wisdom by Jane Struthers. And this was a lovely whimsical little book about countryside customs and meanings behind little things, little tips like how to know if an egg is fresh, and random recipes for yogurt and different preserves and things. So a fun little book. And then the big one that I started in June and went through about half of July reading was Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. I was reading this with Richard from History Lit, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think Richard is still working on it. He's been distracted by other things as he's been reading, as I was a bit as well. But this was a really, really amazing book, and it's a book I'll be coming back to again at some point. Just such a broad book in so many ways, and yet through so many different contexts, it's really just getting down to how an individual can sort of hold on to their dignity in all kinds of different situations. At least that's one little thing that I got out of it. And then the last one from that random review update that I did, I'll leave the link to it in the description, was Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, which was a reread for me. I'm trying to get a bit better with Jane Austen July, and at least reading one Jane Austen during Jane Austen July. So I reread this and found it delightful. A very nice book. And then since then I've finished 3 books. I think at least one of them I've been bringing up periodically as I've been making my way through them. But just to show you, they are The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, William Wordsworth, the major works, including the prelude, and then Fernando Pessoa, a little larger than the entire universe, his selected poems, and they're edited and translated by Richard Zenith. So I'll start off with The Dispossessed, which is just a really, really wonderful book. I enjoyed it quite a lot, and it pairs really, really well with Life and Fate in at least one fairly obvious way. So one of the main characters in Life and Fate is a physicist who has this amazing discovery, but then suddenly the machinations of the state and fear of being denounced or arrested are compromising him, at least morally and ethically, and are putting him between a rock and a hard place. And I think Le Guin is doing similar things with The Dispossessed, which is a book about a physicist, a theoretical physicist called Chevek. He lives on this anarchist world called Aneres, and essentially he just can't get any further with his theory because it's not useful. Essentially, his community, the world where he lives, just can't find any practical application for his theory on their world, and so he's decided to leave, which is a strange and radical step. He's sort of becoming a bit of a pariah, I suppose, on his own planet by choosing to do this, by communicating with outsiders, and he's in a way defecting to the enemy almost, going off to the neighbouring planet, or I think Aneres is a moon of this other planet called Uras, and that's a much more maybe a slightly exaggerated, but it's very much like our own world in many ways. It's full of blatant consumerism. It's incredibly sexist in many ways. Women are objectified and kept at home and can't work. And so yeah, it's a very an exaggerated version of, I don't know, a kind of mid 20th century stereotype, I suppose, but is making a very clear point in a very clear contrast with Aneres, this anarchist planet where no one owns anything. There is no government. If someone doesn't want to be a part of the community, they can just go off and wander off and live on the fringes if they want to. Women and men have the exact same standing in society, and have just as much opportunity. People can choose to partner with whoever they want for as long as they want, and so it's a very different world to this quite consumeristic, quite conservative, quite incredibly capitalistic planet. So one very random detail, I suppose, that I can remember is that Chevek, when he's there, is perplexed by how everything is wrapped up and in layers. He goes into a sweet shop, and he asks for a chocolate, and then they put the chocolate in one little wrapper and they wrap it up meticulously, and then that's in another wrapper, and then they put a ribbon around it, then they put that in a box, and then they put the box in a bag, and there's so many layers to things, maybe almost mirroring something else that perplexes him, which is all of the doors and the locks, and the fact that people will lock themselves in to their homes because whether they fear for their safety or for their property, and so all of this, this contrast between these two worlds, is at least a part of it, but it goes back and forth as you're reading it. So it's not just Chevek acclimatizing to this new world. With every other chapter, you're going back, starting with the beginning of his life, and you're getting his intellectual and personal development, and you kind of get to see why he decided to leave, where the limits of his own world were, what brings him to that decision. And I found it brilliant. I think, like with Life and Fate, there's this very humane, gentle approach to human nature, even though there's a lot at stake. and it goes some places that I wasn't expecting it to either. I was maybe expecting it to be much more abstract, I suppose, but in terms of just plot, I found it quite exhilarating, and it really pulls you in. So I really enjoyed The Dispossessed. I think that's just about all I have to say about it at the moment. It's one I'll be coming back to, and I need to go and read some more Le Guin at some point. But I really loved that, and I really enjoy her writing. I can just remember just beginning it, and just the first few pages, everything was just so vivid, and I felt kind of so present in the world she was describing, even if it's very different. So yeah, I enjoyed that quite a lot. So I'll be trying to read some more Le Guin at some point. We'll see when. And then next up, we've got William Wordsworth, and I finished off the major works, and really over July, I was reading The Prelude, and I just read I think it's in 12 or is it 13 books. Let's have a look. Where's the last book of The Prelude? Oh dear. Yeah, 13 books. And yeah, I was just reading a book here and there every now and then. And I, on the whole, enjoyed it. I think that the best parts are kind of at the beginning and the end. There's a few little good bits in the middle. But the idea of The Prelude is it's his own, again, his intellectual or his kind of sensational is the word I have in mind. It's about his development, about not necessarily who he was reading and when, and who his friends were and things like that, but more how he became attuned to certain things and how certain things became important to him. It's particularly about how a poet develops, and I think for him how your relationship with nature develops over time, and how really that is what's sort of allowed him to write and to express himself the way he does. And at the very beginning, it's all about childhood, and the child in nature, and just incredibly arresting and wonderful. I'll read just the very beginning of book one. Oh, there is blessing in this gentle breeze that blows from the green fields and from the clouds and from the sky. It beats against my cheek and seems half conscious of the joy it gives. O welcome messenger, O welcome friend, a captive greets thee, coming from a house of bondage, from yon city's walls set free, a prison where he hath been long immured. Now I am free, enfranchised and at large, may fix my habitation where I will. What dwelling shall receive me? In what vale shall be my harbour? Underneath what grove shall I take my home? And what sweet stream shall with its murmurs lull me to my rest? The earth is all before me, with a heart joyous, nor sacred at its own liberty. I look about, and should the guide I choose be nothing better than a wandering cloud, I cannot miss my way. So just that feeling of stepping out the house and finally feeling free and just going out and going wherever the wind takes you, just wonderfully portrayed. And then sort of later on, then it gets a bit more. There are moments where it gets more reflective, and sometimes I do enjoy his rather abstract musings on things. I'm just gonna see if I can find one that I like. Yes, here's the beginning of book 12, which is essentially, sorry, I'm just going to go back, because it's continuing on from book 11, and book 11 is about how imagination is impaired and then restored. I just remember this first little bit standing out to me. From nature doth emotion come, and moods of calmness equally are nature's gift. This is her glory. These two attributes are sister horns that constitute her strength. This twofold influence is the sun and shower of all her bounties, both in origin and end alike benignant. Hence it is that genius, which exists by interchange of peace and excitation, finds in her his best and purest friend. From her receives that energy by which he seeks the truth, is roused, aspires, grasps, struggles, wishes, craves. From her that happy stillness of the mind, which fits him to receive it when unsought. But partly I just found it funny that he very smoothly puts in there that he's a genius, which I found quite funny. But yeah, this idea of calmness and excitation both coming from nature, and that's a very, Wordsworthian thing. Will I be able to find the daffodils in time? The famous lines. Probably not. Where are we? 303. Just to contrast that idea of excitation and peacefulness, and I wandered lonely as a cloud. I think it's towards the end, in the last stanza. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils, and so that again, that sort of peacefulness that comes to him through that earlier excitation. Also thinking of Tinton Abbey as well, where when he's in the city and he's all sad, this particular landscape of this particular place in the Wye Valley is a nourishment to him in those times, and so I could definitely see a through line, and I think always when he's talking about his relationship to nature, I do always find it quite moving in a very quite intimate, quite visceral way, and I don't know exactly how to explain it, other than maybe as someone, as a young person with my family, we'd go out hiking a lot, and I love being outside, and he just taps into your mind frame when you're out there. There's a bit towards the end of the prelude where him and one of his friends go up Snowdon, and they're going up in the wee hours of the morning to watch the sunrise from the summit. And for the one part, I'm fairly certain they're going up my favourite path up Snowdon, but there's this little bit where they're all excited and they're talking to each other, and then each falls into their own little world and is just dwelling on their own thoughts, and just capturing wonderfully that thing that happens when you're out for a walk in company, how conversations sort of drift in and out, and one moment you're incredibly connected to someone, and then suddenly you're in your own little world for a little while as well. And I think just in many ways, he's a I don't know, he's a what's the word I'm thinking of? Kind of comrade of sorts, and at least a lot of the things he values when it comes to nature and humanity's place in the world in relation to that, I think does kind of line up with my early experiences and how I was brought up. So it resonates quite deeply, I think. They're at least the reasons that stand out to me at the moment. And then finally, for this month, I finished off A Little Larger Than the Whole Universe. So the selected poems of Fernando Pessoa, translated by Richard Zenith. I'd read one other translation of Pessoa, another selection by Zenith. Here it is, which is Pessoa and Co. And essentially they're two almost completely different selections. I think there are only 6 short poems from Pessoa and Co., which was the earlier selection, that make it into A Little Larger Than the Whole Universe. And they both roughly have the same structure. They're organised by specific heteronyms. So for anyone sort of new to Fernando Pessoa, he wrote in these things called heteronyms. So similar but quite different to what we think of as a pseudonym, where it's not just another name he's writing under, but completely different personalities. They're stylistically very different. Their worldviews may vary. They often contradict one another, and sometimes in articles and things that Pessoa wrote, they would disagree with one another, and things like that. And so they're both organised and really contain, for the most part, the poetry of 3/4 of the main heteronyms. The first being, making sure I don't get them muddled up, Alberto Chiero, who is the kind of Robbie Burns of his heteronyms, the kind of natural genius. He's the idea behind the poems, and behind the heteronym, is that he's a shepherd. He's quite rustic and looks at things very simply, and just wants to experience things for themselves. There's a lot of him saying, why are we naming this? We could just be looking at it. And so there's a lovely immediacy to his poetry. And actually what I sometimes love is that the really eccentric way that well, in this case Chiero is trying to express something, until you've sort of teased it out for yourself, even that can seem a little self-contradictory. I'll see if I can find an example. I probably can't. The end of the first poem in here. To love is the supreme innocence, and the sum of innocence is to not think. So yeah, it probably would have made sense if I'd read a bit more. But there's a lot of these little twisty-turny sentences that are. That one isn't really contradicting itself, but if you get an idea of that kind of formulation, and sometimes they sort of turn around and contradict, but they sometimes don't really contradict when you think about it. Anyway, Chiero, and there is sometimes a kind of sadness to him in a way, and particularly, at least I found it in his love poems. He has a few love poems, and again, there's something about just seeing something and not naming it, and just experiencing, and realising that, I think something that came home much more powerfully with this selection this time round is the way in which, even though all of the heteronyms have their own personalities, their own styles, ultimately Pessoa is expressing something of himself through them, and I couldn't help but read some of these Chiero poems about love that are somewhat distanced, a little tragically, and with Pessoa's life in mind, as someone who, would have a kind of engagement that was broken off, and then was back on again, and then was off, and never came to anything. He probably died a virgin. At least that's what Zenith, the translator and a great scholar of Pessoa. That's what he thinks. And then, it just becomes that more tragic then when he's thinking of love, but it's always from a distance. It's always only seeing and not really touching it. So it never, it's not really as experiential as what he's trying to express when he talks about nature or anything else. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's at least something that struck me this time round. And then I think maybe my favourite this time round with Pessoa was Ricardo Reis, or Rice, I'm not entirely sure how to say his name, who is quite pantheistic, and he wants to include us as much as possible, but is still quite pessimistic, which I find quite funny. And he writes these quite classical metered odes, and yeah, I do find him quite funny. I mean, I just caught something in the first one. What was it that he said? I love the roses of Adonis's gardens. Yes, Lydia, I love those winged roses, which one day are born, and on that day die. Light for them is eternal, since they are born after sunrise and end before Apollo quits his visible journey. Let us also make our lives one day, consciously forgetting there's night, Lydia, before and after the little we endure. And so again, there was something quite sweet to that, something very focusing in a way on living in the instant, in the present, which overall was what I found really pleasurable to Ricardo Reis, was that sort of very focused outlook on just living right now and not worrying about the past, not being anxious about the future. But just the phrasing, before and after, the little we endure, that's his encapsulation of experience and of life is something we endure, and it's just a little, just now it's just a little, but it's endured. I really find quite funny and but wholesome as well sometimes in its own way. And then the third main heteronym is Alvaro de Campos, who is much more ostentatious and over the top, sometimes a bit obnoxious. Just going to try and find a page where I can probably just show you at least something in him that I find a little bit annoying sometimes. Let's see if we can find a good example. But yeah, he doesn't do anything by half measures. Again, he's all for feeling and for well, I suppose I think Zenith explained it that that Alberto Chiero just wants to feel things as they are, and Alvaro de Campos just wants to feel everything. And it might be an illusion or a fantasy or a dream. He doesn't care. So there's something much more over the top. But there's all of this sometimes, if you can see it, all of this ayo, ayo, ayo kind of stuff. That's just incredibly over the top. So sometimes I find him a bit annoying, if I'm honest. And this was probably the worst case, his maritime ode, which does start amazingly, and there are some really amazing parts to it, but as a whole I found it a little over the top. But then even Alvaro de Campos gets a little mellower and a little more melancholic as he goes on, a little more reflective. And I think in a way it slowly seems to blur a little more with Pessoa. I'm not sure, but that was something I was noticing or seemed to feel. because then straight after the Cantos, we have poems written in Pessoa's, under Pessoa's own name. I'll just show you. Where are we? And he writes it out as Fernando Pessoa himself, almost as if writing under his own name is just one of many other heteronyms. And a lot of what's in here, written by him, I enjoyed as well. I think still Ricardo Reyes is my favourite at the moment with this time through. Yeah, there was something to Fernando Pessoa as well that I just found myself enjoying his own poetry under his name more than I had in Pessoa and Co. I can't really remember much having all that much of an impact in me, even though I already had an interest in Pessoa and did find it interesting. And the only thing I can really think of as to why that might be is maybe that this is just a better selection of his poetry than this. I'm not sure. So I'll be rereading them both again at some point, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to know Pessoa a little bit better over time. So that's everything that I've read. Yeah, maybe I should have split this up and done my reading plans in a separate video, but I will go through them now because there's not that much there and I don't have too much to say about them. Firstly, there are two books that I'm currently reading. First up, we've got Christopher Hamel's Meetings with Remarkable Manuscripts, which is really, really lovely. I've been enjoying this quite a lot. I'll let you know about it when I've finished it, but it's I think if you like books about books, then you'll enjoy it. And then just before filming, I started reading Gaudete by Ted Hughes, which I think is one of those weird things that he wrote where it's sort of a poetry collection. It kind of isn't. It's kind of a story that he's partly telling in verse, partly telling in prose, and it sort of blurs in and out. Yeah, I just read the prologue. He gives us a brief argument, a brief sort of abstract about what it's about, which is an Anglican clergyman is abducted by spirits into the other world. The spirits create a duplicate of him to take his place in this world during his absence and to carry on his work. This changeling interprets the role of minister in his own way. And I think it's particularly loving your neighbour that he interprets very much in his own way. The narrative recounts the final day of events which lead to his cancellation by the powers of both worlds. The original man reappears in this world, but changed. So that's the argument of the book, and I've just read the prologue, which seems to be describing the clergyman. His name is it Lumb? Something Lumb. What's his first name? The Reverend Nicholas Lumb, and his rather surreal descent into the other world, into what very much seems like the underworld, and some kind of re-emergence to somewhere. So and then it's in the first poem has just jumped to this community where the to the parish and to one of the individuals there. So yeah, I think that'll be good, and just something nice and different to Meetings with Remarkable Manuscripts. I think I can read one around the other quite well. And then once I'm done with one or both of those, the main novel that I want to spend time with in August will be Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I've been sort of semi putting off reading for quite some time. It is one of those books that there aren't many, but it is one of those novels that I do feel a little intimidated by. Mainly, I think, just by the fact that it's a relatively thick book of about 800 pages or 900 pages, and I just wonder. It's just one of those cases where I don't know all too much about it or about what happens in it, and I don't know how much of these 900 pages are going to be for me, but I'm going to find out. And lots of people I enjoy watching on booktube and lots of opinions that I respect tend to point to this as a great go-to book, so I will let you know what I think of Middlemarch. And then I've got two projects going on throughout August as well, two sort of buddy reads or group reads. So me, Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics, and Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads. We're going to start reading the Cantos by Ezra Pound. I've ordered a guide to the Cantos, so I'll show you that once it gets here, because it is something I'll be needing help with. I think both Greg and Alan have got their own guides as well, and we're going to go at a leisurely pace, I think, and we're going to try and read 200 pages over August, and we'll just see how that goes, and we'll alter our pace accordingly. And then to finish off, I've sort of joined up with this rather large and lovely reading group where we're all going to be reading poems by T.S. Eliot over August as well. And this will be quite leisurely as well, and it's quite a nice selection, and I might go off and read other poems by Eliot and not just the set texts, just to get a feel for what was being written around the same time, and how his poems speak to each other, I suppose. So we'll see how much of that I get through, but I'm looking forward to it, and I always enjoy coming back to T.S. Eliot. And that's that. Yeah, a bit more rambly than I was hoping it was going to be, but I hope there was at least something interesting in there. Please let me know if you've enjoyed what you've been reading in July, and let me know what you're thinking of reading in August. But for now, thanks for watching, stay cool, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.